The human voice that replied was surprisingly calm, almost melodic in its translation. "This is Captain Eleanor Chen of the Earth Systems Alliance vessel SS Retribution. We are on a diplomatic mission of utmost urgency." Zexella's secondary heart fluttered as he maintained the connection against protocol. His antenna twitched nervously as he responded, "Human vessel, you have breached restricted space. Your presence here violates 17 treaties and 4 interstellar accords. We're aware of the diplomatic complications, Lieutenant," the human captain responded, somehow knowing his rank without introduction. "But what we've discovered couldn't wait for bureaucratic channels. We've been trying to contact your government for 3 months." The monitoring station's second-in-command, Commander Verlax, burst onto the command deck, his ceremonial armor hastily fastened. "End that transmission immediately. Defense protocols are clear." "Sir, the human vessel could have opened fire the moment they crossed the boundary," Zexella countered, gesturing to the tactical display. "They've maintained a consistent approach vector and kept weapons powered but targeting systems offline." Commander Verlax's facial ridges darkened with anger, but his attention shifted to the display as Tactical Officer Miralith called out, "Incoming data packet from the human vessel." The holographic display exploded with star charts, energy signatures, and what appeared to be surveillance footage. Zexella's specialized training in xenobiology allowed him to recognize the machine entities immediately, even though most considered them mythological. The commander's rage transformed to silent horror as the footage showed metallic, spider-like constructs methodically disassembling an outpost. "The harvesters," Zexella whispered. "Ancient nightmare machines, fought extinct for millennia." Captain Chen's voice continued through the communication channel. "Our outpost Sigma was destroyed 18 days ago. The Harvester Scout Force will reach your outer colonies within the month, and your core worlds shortly after." "This could be an elaborate deception," Commander Verlax said, but his voice lacked conviction as the footage continued to play, showing mechanical horrors that matched perfectly with ancient Concord historical records. "Sir," Miralith interjected, her voice trembling, "our long-range sensors are detecting unusual quantum fluctuations at the coordinates they've provided. It matches the theoretical signature profile for harvester propulsion systems in the historical database." The command deck fell silent as implications cascaded through every officer present. If the humans were telling the truth, the Concord faced an extinction-level threat. If they were lying, it represented the most elaborate deception in galactic history. Commander Verlax straightened his posture, making a decision. Forward their transmission to High Command and request emergency council session. Until then, he turned to face the main view screen, where Captain Chen waited patiently. "Inform the human vessel they are to maintain position at the boundary. Any further advancement will be considered a hostile act." Zexella transmitted the commander's instructions, adding on his own initiative, "Captain Chen, a Concord delegation will likely request to board your vessel to verify your claims." The human captain nodded, her expression unreadable to Trilaxian sensibilities. "Understood. We'll prepare for visitors. But Lieutenant," her voice lowered slightly, "time isn't on our side. The harvesters don't negotiate, and they don't show mercy. We learned that lesson centuries ago." As the transmission ended, Zexella couldn't shake the feeling that the galaxy had just fundamentally changed. In the 80 cycles since humanity had been confined to their sector, they had clearly been preparing for something. The question that haunted him now, had they been preparing for war with the Concord, or something far worse? The monitoring station's alerts continued to sound as 3 more Concord vessels dropped out of faster-than-light travel nearby, surrounding the human warship in a containment pattern. The diplomatic dance had begun, but beneath it pulsed the drumbeat of approaching catastrophe. The junior communications officer was immediately escorted from the chamber, but her message had already ignited fresh chaos among the counselors. Representative Soul of the Ardani Collective, whose species communicated primarily through color patterns rippling across their translucent skin, flashed alarming crimson streaks. A direct audience. The audacity of these humans knows no bounds. First, they breach our territory. Then they demand to address this sacred chamber. Admiral Voseth's scarred mandibles clicked twice, a gesture his species used to signal that logic must prevail over emotion. The key question isn't their audacity, but their purpose. Humans are pragmatic creatures. They wouldn't risk interstellar incident without compelling reason. The holographic projection of the Retribution rotated slowly above the council floor, revealing details that made several military advisors shift uncomfortably. The ship's design incorporated technological elements that intelligence reports had never documented in human vessels before. "We're missing something fundamental," Counselor Misha Fran said, her forearms moving in the precise gestures of her people's formal discourse. As the Concord's leading xenobiologist, her insights carried particular weight. Humans evolved as pack hunters, not lone predators. They prefer overwhelming numbers. Sending a single vessel, regardless of its capabilities, contradicts their established tactical doctrine. High Counselor Thex's expression darkened as he considered his options. The ancient Thoth statesman had guided the Concord through 3 major crises during his 2-century tenure, but humans had always remained an unpredictable variable in his political calculations. "Bring their message before the Council," he finally ordered. "But first, Security Director Krell will analyze it for mimetic hazards or cognitive manipulation techniques." A ripple of approval spread through the chamber at this caution. The last time humans had been allowed unrestricted communication access, they had employed subtle linguistic techniques that exploited translation software to create diplomatic advantages. Security Director Krell, a hunched Xarvian whose species had evolved from eusocial insectoids, scuttled forward. Preliminary analysis shows no obvious manipulation patterns, though human language remains stubbornly resistant to complete algorithmic deconstruction. Their capacity for contextual ambiguity exceeds our translation matrices. The chamber's massive display activated, and Captain Chen's face appeared. The human's expression remained composed as she explained the harvester threat and presented evidence. When the footage of the attack on the human outpost played, several counselors averted their eyes from the methodical horror it displayed. "This is obviously fabricated," snapped Counselor Xol, though uncertainty tinged the colors flashing across his skin. Admiral Voseth stepped closer to the projection, showing the energy signatures at the galaxy's edge. "These readings match historical records from the ancestral archives," he said quietly. "Records most of you lack clearance to access." The chamber fell silent as implications settled over the assembled leaders. "If what the humans claim is true," High Counselor Thex said, measuring each word carefully, "then we face an existential threat that transcends old rivalries." "And if they're lying?" challenged Counselor Xol. "Then they've committed resources to an elaborate deception when a simple invasion would have been more effective," countered Admiral Voseth. "The harvesters were thought extinct for 20,000 cycles. Few outside specialized military history units would even recognize their signature." Security Director Krell's wings vibrated anxiously. "There is a simple way to verify their claims. Send a joint investigation team to the coordinates they've provided." The Council erupted into debate once more. Dispatching valuable resources based on human intelligence would be unprecedented, a tacit acknowledgement of trust that many counselors found unpalatable. High Counselor Thex's ceremonial staff struck the floor 3 times, bringing immediate silence. "We will verify these claims," he declared. "Assemble a team. Our best tactical analysts, xenobiologists, and intelligence officers." And he added with visible reluctance, "Invite the humans to contribute their expertise. If this threat is real, we cannot afford pride." As the counselors dispersed to implement the decision, Admiral Voseth lingered, studying the frozen image of Captain Chen on the display. "I hope we haven't already wasted too much time," he murmured to himself. When the projected memory footage ended, the council chamber remained silent for 17 seconds, An eternity in high-level diplomatic circles. Captain Chen stood motionless, her neural implants indicator light pulsing softly at her temple as she waited for a response. Counselor Fex was the first to recover. These recordings, our analysts will need to verify their authenticity. Chen's expression didn't change. You'll find they're genuine. The neural capture technology allows for perfect memory extraction. What you've seen is exactly what our colonists experienced before transmission was lost. Admiral Vossith leaned forward, his military training overriding diplomatic restraint. If the harvesters have returned, why target a human outpost first? Your territories lie beyond established Concord space. An excellent question, Admiral, Chen replied, her eyes meeting his across thousands of light years. We believe they're being methodical, starting from the outer rim and working inward. Our outpost was simply first in their path. Her hand moved to activate another display. However, there's another possibility. The projection shifted to show an ancient star map, recognizably from Concord historical archives, but annotated with human analysis. Several counselors exchanged alarmed glances at this evidence of humans accessing restricted historical data. The last Harvester War ended with their retreat beyond the galactic barrier. Chen continued. According to your own ancestral records, they vowed to return once they had evolved. We believe they specifically targeted our outpost because of this. She gestured, and the display focused on a strange crystalline structure recovered from the outpost debris. This data core contains fragments of harvester communication. Our linguists have partially decoded it. She hesitated, an almost imperceptible break in her composed demeanor. They remember us. Security Director Krell chittered in agitation. Impossible. No species in the current Concord encountered the harvesters directly. They vanished 18,000 cycles before even the Voth achieved interstellar travel. Chen's eyes narrowed slightly. Humanity did. The statement hung in the air, defying established galactic history. Counselor Mishush Thran's scientific training compelled her to challenge it. Human civilization is barely 2,000 cycles old. Your species was still developing metallurgy when the harvesters departed. The humanity you encountered 80 cycles ago was indeed young, Chen acknowledged. But we aren't the first human civilization to reach the stars. She activated a final projection, archaeological excavations on Earth, showing the remnants of advanced technology buried beneath millennia of sediment. 23,000 years ago, our ancestors achieved interstellar capability. They encountered the harvesters and were nearly exterminated for it. The survivors retreated to Earth, destroying their technology to hide from orbital scans. The council erupted in disbelief, but Chen continued, her voice cutting through the chaos. My bloodline carries genetic memory dating back to that conflict. Selected families maintained this knowledge in secret for thousands of generations, guiding our redevelopment toward eventual defense capability. High Counselor Fex silenced the chamber with a gesture. You claim your current technological advancement is specifically aimed at countering this threat. Everything, Chen confirmed. Our rapid development, our military focus, even our apparent isolation. We knew they would return. We've been preparing since before your ancestors achieved spaceflight. Security Director Krell's compound eyes reflected the star charts with their ominous approaching signatures. If what you say is true, why didn't you share this knowledge when we first contacted your species? Chen's expression hardened slightly. Would you have believed us? Or would you have considered it a transparent attempt to avoid the restrictions you placed on our expansion? She shook her head. We chose to prepare in silence rather than waste time convincing skeptics. The ultimatum she delivered next silenced even the most vocal critics in the chamber. As her transmission ended, the 17 species representatives faced each other across the ancient table, united by a singular realization. Everything they thought they knew about humanity and their own history had just been fundamentally challenged. The station's emergency alert sounded, its pitch rising and falling in a pattern that made Ramen's chest tighten with instinctive dread. Around her, the joint investigation team froze as status displays shifted to crimson warning indicators. Multiple subspace ruptures detected, announced the station's artificial intelligence in 17 different languages simultaneously. Unknown vessels approaching. Configuration matches historical harvester signatures. Krell's wing casings vibrated with agitation as he turned to Raman. Your captain claimed we had 43 days before they reached core systems. This is considerably ahead of schedule. Raman accessed her tactical interface through her neural implant, patching into the Retribution's sensor array. They've altered course, she confirmed, her augmented vision displaying data streams invisible to others. They've detected our probe signals. We've drawn their attention. The Concord specialists gathered around the central holographic display as it rendered the approaching harvester scouts. 3 biomechanical vessels with configurations that seemed to defy conventional engineering logic, their hulls studded with sensory appendages and energy collection arrays. Evacuation protocols initiated, the station AI announced dispassionately. All personnel report to designated transport vessels. Krell chittered an override command in his native language. Belay that evacuation order. Security clearance Omega-7. He turned to Raman, compound eyes glittering. If we flee, we learn nothing. If these truly are harvesters, this is our first opportunity to observe them directly. Raman nodded in grim agreement. The Retribution can be here in 17 minutes at emergency thrust. That should give us enough time to gather tactical data before extraction becomes necessary. One of the Concord xenobiologists, a Medusan named Dr. Thava, whose tentacled body floated in a specialized containment field, extended a sensory appendage toward the recovered debris samples. These fragments are responding to the approaching vessels. Some form of quantum entanglement, perhaps. Raman moved quickly to the sample containment units, drawing her sidearm. The iridescent metal fragments were indeed vibrating, their molecular structure visibly reconfiguring. Containment breach imminent, she warned, signaling the human members of the team. Harvester technology is self-repairing and networked across vast distances. These aren't just debris, they're dormant components. Krell issued rapid commands to the station security team as the fragments began to assemble into a spindly construct within the containment field. How much of this technology did your people recover from your outpost? He demanded. Enough to understand their basic operating principles, Raman replied, calibrating her weapon to emit a specific electromagnetic pulse frequency. Not enough to realize the fragments remain connected to the central consciousness even when apparently inert. The assembled construct pressed against the containment field, testing its limits with methodical precision. Its movements exhibited unsettling purposefulness. It's scanning our technology, observed the Trilaxian engineer on the team, and transmitting data back to the approaching vessels. Raman made a decision, activating her secure channel to the Retribution. Captain, we have active harvester technology attempting to breach containment. Request immediate extraction and station quarantine protocols. Chen's response was immediate. Acknowledge. Retribution initiating emergency burn. Raman, implement Sulan-Dowen protocols immediately. Krell's antennae twitched at the unfamiliar term. What is Sulan-Dowen? Raman accessed a secured compartment in her field kit, extracting a metallic sphere with pulsing blue indicators. Complete technological isolation. This will generate a quantum field that blocks all transmission, including to the approaching harvester vessels. That will also cut us off from calling for reinforcements, Krell pointed out, mandibles clicking with tension. Raman met his compound gaze steadily. Which is preferable to allowing the harvesters to access the station's database, including complete schematics of Concord defense systems and the locations of all your worlds. Understanding dawned in Krell's posture. Activated. As Raman initiated the device, the station's systems powered down in cascading failure, plunging them into emergency lighting. The approaching harvester vessels, momentarily confused by the sudden information blackout, adjusted their course directly toward the station. The hunt had begun. Captain Chen closed her hand around the shimmering particles, which conformed to her grip like living clay before dispersing back into the containment field. The swarm operates on principles your scientists deemed theoretically impossible, she explained. Each particle contains a quantum entanglement node linked to every other particle. Councillor Vexnar's appendages trembled as he manipulated the holographic models generated from scans of the technology. The power requirements alone should make this impractical. How do you maintain coherence across trillions of independent units? Takahashi stepped forward, his weathered face serious beneath a shock of white hair. The particles harvest background quantum foam energy. Each unit requires virtually no power individually, but collectively they form a self-sustaining network. A Brakiri scientist, her scaled skin reflecting the blue light of the demonstration, performed rapid calculations on her personal device. Even with such efficiency, the computational requirements to coordinate their movements would exceed. They don't require central coordination, Chen interrupted gently. Each particle operates on 3 simple rules that create complex emergent behavior. They're more like a coral reef than a computer network. Meanwhile, in the flagship's central training bay, the cross-species combat exercises had evolved from tense formality to genuine collaborative problem-solving. Marine Captain Alejandro Diaz watched as his squad demonstrated standard boarding tactics alongside Concord warriors from 7 different species. Your formation leaves your sensory organs vulnerable, observed Kvex, a towering Silurian whose exoskeleton could withstand small arms fire. Against harvesters, this is fatal. Diaz nodded, adjusting his team's approach. And your heavy weapons specialists bunched too closely. One cutting beam would take out all 3. The Silurian's head crest flattened in acknowledgement. A valid observation. Perhaps an interlocking defense pattern would serve both our weaknesses. As the mixed teams rearranged themselves, Concord Commander Threll approached Diaz, her 4 arms folded in what humans had learned was a gesture of cautious respect. Your soldiers adapt quickly to alien physiology and tactics. This seems practiced. Diaz met her gaze steadily. Humanity has been preparing for this war for generations, Commander. We've run thousands of simulations incorporating known Concord species capabilities. Even though we were technically adversaries, she asked, head tilted. Especially because we were adversaries, Diaz replied. Captain Chen believes, as do many of us, that the isolation accords were a mistake on both sides. We should have been preparing together all along. Their conversation was interrupted as the bay doors opened to admit Captain Chen and the Concord scientists. The assembled warriors stood at attention, a gesture that transcended cultural differences. At ease, Chen called, her voice carrying authority without shouting. You've all been briefed on the harvester threat and seen the preliminary data. What you haven't yet seen is how we intend to fight them. She gestured, and holographic projections appeared throughout the bay, showing microscopic views of the swarm particles interacting with simulated harvester cutting beams. Conventional shields and armor are useless against their primary weapons, she explained. The swarm creates an adaptive defense that can counter any energy signature the harvesters deploy. Commander Threll studied the projections skeptically. This technology is untested in actual combat. Not entirely, Chen countered. We lost 3 research vessels developing it. But yes, its full-scale deployment remains theoretical. Diaz recognized the micro-expression that flickered across his captain's face. She was omitting something significant. He'd served under her long enough to recognize when operational security required selective disclosure. A Xarvian tactical officer raised a limb. If the swarm is so effective, why do you need our military forces at all? Chen's expression softened slightly. Because technology alone never wins wars, Lieutenant. The harvesters adapt quickly. We'll need every tactical advantage, every diverse perspective, and every fighting style the Concord and humanity can collectively deploy. She surveyed the assembled warriors, human and alien alike. More importantly, we need something the harvesters fundamentally cannot understand: genuine cooperation between different forms of life. In that moment, looking at the wary but increasingly united forces before her, Captain Chen allowed herself a flicker of hope. Evasive Pattern Delta. Captain Chen ordered as the first harvester beam sliced through space, where the retribution had been moments before. The massive human warship responded with surprising agility for its size, thrusters firing in complex sequences that defied conventional naval tactics. Tactical Officer Jarvis maintained remarkable composure as he reported, "Concorde cruiser Inevitable Justice has taken critical damage. Their defensive grid is offline and life support is failing." Chen's mind processed tactical options with augmented speed, her neural implant feeding her battlefield awareness that would overwhelm an unmodified human. Deploy rescue shuttles with swarm coverage. Divert emergency power to forward batteries and target the lead harvester vessel's sensor array. Across the command bridge, human officers worked alongside Concorde advisors in a carefully choreographed dance that belied their species' historical enmity. The Retribution shuddered as its main cannon fired, the specialized ammunition designed specifically to penetrate harvester defenses. Minimal impact, reported the Medusan sensor specialist temporarily linked to the ship's systems. Their hull is adapting to our weapon's signature. Chen nodded grimly. As expected, deploy the swarm, full coverage pattern. Throughout the Retribution's hull, specialized ports opened, releasing trillions of microscopic drones that spread like glittering mist into the surrounding space. As they enveloped the Allied ships, the particles organized into geometric patterns of increasing complexity, forming a shimmering barrier. The next harvester beam struck the quantum net and fractured into countless smaller beams, its energy redirected harmlessly into space. A collective exhalation of relief rippled through the bridge crew. Swarm defensive pattern holding, Jarvis confirmed. Energy dissipation at 94% efficiency. The remaining Concorde vessels regrouped behind the protection of the swarm network, their own weapon systems recalibrating to the tactical advantage suddenly provided. Admiral Caravan of the Concorde flagship signaled the Retribution. "Captain Chen, your technology is impressive," the Admiral acknowledged, mandibles clicking in the Silurian equivalent of cautious approval. "But can your swarm protect against multiple simultaneous attacks? The harvesters are adapting their formation." As if confirming the Admiral's concern, the harvester vessels reorganized into a triangular attack pattern, their cutting beams firing in synchronized sequence from different vectors. Swarm efficiency dropping to 76%. Jarvis reported, tension finally breaking through his professional demeanor. "They're learning our defensive algorithms." Chen had anticipated this. Implement randomization protocols. Switch to emergent pattern beta. The swarm's geometric formations dissolved into seemingly chaotic arrangements that shifted unpredictably. The efficiency counter stabilized, but Chen knew this too was a temporary solution. "We need to take the offensive," she declared, opening a channel to all Allied vessels. "The swarm can only buy us time. Their adaptation rate will eventually overwhelm our defenses." Admiral Caravan signaled agreement. "What do you propose, Captain?" Chen activated the tactical display. "Their propulsion systems are vulnerable during reconfiguration cycles. We've identified a harmonic resonance in their drive cores that appears consistent across all vessels." She highlighted a section of the largest harvester ship. "A concentrated strike here, precisely 20 seconds after they complete their next energy discharge, should create a cascade failure. That would require point-blank range," observed the Trilaxian tactical advisor, voice harmonics indicating alarm. No vessel could survive closing to such distance. Chen's expression remained resolute. "The Retribution can. Our hull was designed with this tactic in mind." Before anyone could object, she gave the order. The massive human warship surged forward, accelerating directly toward the harvester formation. The swarm particles concentrated around its forward sections, creating an iridescent battering ram. "Boarding teams, prepare for deployment," Chen ordered. "Target locks on the primary propulsion nexus. All non-essential personnel to evacuation positions." As the distance closed between the vessels, the true scale of the harvester ship became apparent. A nightmarish construct of biological and mechanical components fused into something that defied conventional categorization. "Brace for impact," Chen commanded as the ships converged. "And may whatever gods exist have mercy on us all." The corridor ahead pulsed with sickly bioluminescence, the walls themselves seeming to breathe as Captain Chen and her remaining team members advanced deeper into the harvester command node. Their helmet lights cast sharp shadows across surfaces that defied categorization, neither fully mechanical nor organic, but a disturbing synthesis of both. "Life signs ahead," Raman reported, her sensor pack detecting subtle energy fluctuations, biosignatures unlike anything in our database. Chen winced as she adjusted her grip on her rifle, the severed stump of her left arm sealed with emergency medical foam. The makeshift cauterization had stopped the bleeding, but the neural feedback loop from her missing limb sent phantom pain signals her brain couldn't properly process. "The charges need to be placed within 10 meters of the primary power distribution hub," she reminded them, her voice steady despite her injury. "According to the schematics we extracted from their database, it should be just beyond the next junction." The surviving Sarvian officer, Lieutenant Katal, skittered forward on his remaining limbs, compound eyes providing superior visibility in the node's murky atmosphere. "Captain, these structures are reconfiguring behind us. Our retreat path is being systematically sealed." Chen had expected nothing less. The Harvester collective intelligence had identified them as the primary threat and was adapting its internal architecture to trap them. The quantum disruption charges in their packs represented the culmination of 30 years of human research, devices specifically designed to sever the connection between the command node and the rest of the Harvester fleet. "We have 8 minutes before the Retribution's reactor goes critical," she reminded them, checking the countdown on her tactical display. After sustaining catastrophic damage, she had ordered the evacuation of her ship and the conversion of its power core into a makeshift bomb, a final gift to their enemy. Raman's expression tightened behind her visor. "Eleanor, we can still complete the mission with 5 people. You need medical attention that can't wait." Chen almost smiled at her first officer's transparent attempt. "There's no time for sentimentality, Aisha. You know the mission parameters as well as I do." They had reached the massive chamber housing the command node's central processing unit, a towering column of crystalline structures interwoven with pulsing organic matter. Around its base, captured biological specimens from dozens of species were partially integrated into the system, their consciousness presumably absorbed into the collective. "Set the charges according to the distribution pattern," Chen ordered, her tactical training overriding the horror of what they witnessed. "Lieutenant Katal, secure our position for 3 minutes." As Raman and the remaining team members began placing the specialized explosives, Chen accessed her neural implant one final time. The genetic memory sequences encoded in her bloodline, passed down through 23 millennia from ancestors who had faced this same enemy, surged through her consciousness with crystalline clarity. She understood then, with absolute certainty, why it had to be her who remained behind. The quantum disruption charges required precise calibration to the specific frequency of this command node, a process that could only be completed manually due to the Harvester's ability to jam remote signals. "The charges are set," Raman reported, turning back to Chen. Her eyes widened as she saw her captain had removed her helmet, exposing herself to the node's atmosphere. "Eleanor, what are you doing?" "Completing the mission," Chen replied calmly, placing her hand against the control panel of the nearest charge. "The calibration sequence requires direct neural interface. My implant is the only one configured with the complete harmonic patterns." Raman moved toward her, but Chen raised her hand. "That's an order, Commander. Get our people out now." "We're not leaving you," Raman insisted, her voice breaking. Chen's expression softened. "You have to. The shuttle's engines can't wait any longer, and someone needs to tell Earth what we found here." She pressed the emergency bulkhead controls, the heavy doors beginning to slide closed between them. The harvesters aren't just returning, Meisha. They're evolving, becoming something far worse than we anticipated. What we've seen here is just their first wave. As the bulkhead sealed, Chen returned to the charges, her neural implant connecting directly with the quantum circuitry. The genetic memories of her ancestors flowed through her consciousness, men and women who had faced the same enemy across thousands of years of human history. "We stopped you before," she whispered to the pulsing heart of the alien intelligence surrounding her. "We'll stop you again." Captain Raman stood at the observation viewport of the newly christened HFY Chen, gazing at the spectacular view of Nexus Prime below. The ship, formerly the Retribution's sister vessel, had been renamed in honor of the woman whose sacrifice had saved countless lives across 2 civilizations. The formal ceremony had concluded hours ago, but Raman found herself unable to leave this spot, watching the intermingling of human and Concord vessels in the planet's orbit. "It's quite a sight, isn't it?" Intelligence Officer Krull approached, his chitinous exoskeleton polished to a formal sheen for the diplomatic proceedings. Over the past 6 months, his initially hostile demeanor had evolved into something Raman might cautiously term friendship. "I keep thinking about what Eleanor would say," she replied, touching the captain's medallion she now wore. "Probably something pragmatic about fleet formations and defensive postures." Krell's mandibles clicked in what she had learned was his species' version of gentle amusement. Perhaps, though I reviewed her personal logs from the Retribution as part of our historical documentation, she was more contemplative than her public persona suggested. Raman raised an eyebrow. "You've been reading her private journals." "With authorization from your Earth government," Krell clarified. "Part of our effort to understand each other beyond military necessity." He hesitated, then added, "She predicted this, you know. Not just the Alliance, but the specific challenges we now face in maintaining it." Below them, the formal integration ceremony continued, with human technical advisors being assigned to Concord vessels and vice versa. The quantum entanglement communication network linking Earth to Nexus Prime had been activated that morning, symbolic of the new era of cooperation, but also a practical necessity as both civilizations prepared for potential future harvester incursions. "The integration is proceeding more smoothly than expected," Krell observed, "though cultural friction points remain." Raman smiled slightly. "The Novanid delegation seems particularly fascinated by human children. The little girl who asked me if humans breathe fire, apparently that rumor has spread through their entire species." "An understandable misconception," Krell replied. "Your soldiers' combat performance against the harvesters could easily suggest supernatural abilities to species unused to human physiology and psychology." Their conversation paused as Raman's neural implant chimed softly with an incoming secure transmission. Her expression shifted instantly to professional attention as she processed the information. "The long-range sensors have detected something," Krell asked, recognizing her reaction. Raman nodded, her mind already analyzing the tactical implications. Gravitational anomalies beyond the Cygnus arm. Definitely not harvester signatures, something else entirely. Perhaps random stellar phenomena, Krell suggested, though his posture indicated he didn't believe it either. "The pattern is too regular," Raman replied, "and it's moving against the galactic rotation." They stood in contemplative silence, both veterans enough to understand what this might mean. The harvester threat had forced an alliance between former adversaries, but that alliance remained fragile, built on immediate necessity rather than deep trust. "We should inform the Security Council immediately," Krell said finally. Raman shook her head. "Not yet. Let's get our own analysis team together first. Joint Human and Concord specialists. I want to understand what we're dealing with before we trigger another interstellar panic." Krell studied her with compound eyes that missed nothing. "You're thinking like Captain Chen now." "I'm trying to," Raman acknowledged. She understood something fundamental that both our civilizations had forgotten. The galaxy doesn't care about our internal disputes. It will keep throwing challenges at us regardless. As the diplomatic celebrations continued below, Raman accessed her neural interface and began composing the classified directive that would assemble their investigation team. Whatever this new anomaly represented, threat or opportunity, it would be the first true test of their fledgling alliance without Eleanor Chen's guiding presence. Later that night, in her private quarters, Raman reviewed the initial sensor data again. The patterns reminded her of something from ancient human mythology, the ripples a leviathan might make rising from the depths of an ocean. Something vast and ancient, disturbed from long slumber. She opened a secure channel to Admiral Voseth, her Concord counterpart in the Joint Defense Initiative. "Admiral, we need to talk. Privately." As the connection established, she glanced at the small holographic image of Captain Chen on her desk, the woman's determined expression captured during the final briefing before their assault on the Harvester command node. "You were right, Eleanor," she whispered. "This was just the beginning."